In the 19th and early 20th century, mutton was a mainstay of America's households and restaurants. But then it virtually disappeared from our dining room tables, except in Daviess County, where barbecued mutton is still on the menu and still a welcome dish at church picnics. Why does mutton reign supreme in Western Kentucky? Well, we search for the answers to this mutton mystery in Owensboro at the International Barbecue Festival.
Without a doubt, we are the mutton capital of the world. It goes back to our heritage. I mean, we've been doing this for over 125 years, and it traces back to the original people that settled here.
Mutton is the meat from a sheep, an adult sheep, usually 2, occasionally 3 years old. If you go back 100, 200 years, it was the prime meat that everyone was enjoying. It's really fallen out of favor, and it's very difficult to find. You do find mutton very specifically in Daviess County in that area at the moment, and I think part of it is historical. There have actually been sheep in Kentucky since Daniel Boone first crossed the Cumberland Gap. Western Kentucky is really much more readily suited to grazing sheep. It has more of that flat land. And so for that reason, sheep became much more concentrated in Western Kentucky. And then in Daviess County in particular, you had a lot of Welsh immigrants that came in the early 19th century. And so they would have been very familiar with sheep farming, whether it was for the meat or for wool. They would have been familiar with the grazing techniques and so on. And so Daviess County was well suited to that. Sheep were being raised not for their meat, but for wool. The wool had huge value, obviously, fabric, clothing, and so on. And the meat was really just an afterthought.
Once the sheep became too old, they couldn't produce wool anymore. So what did they decide to do? They decided to eat their sheep. And they discovered that if you're going to eat an old sheep, you're going to have to cook it forever. You're going to have to cook it low and slow, and that's kind of how mutton barbecue came about in Owensboro. Owensboro style barbecue is mutton typically, and it's slow cooked over hickory wood for at least 12 hours, if not more. And then what we don't use a sauce. We use what's called a dip that you constantly baste the sheep with as you cook it over those hickory coals.
The dip is a vinegar base. It's vinegar, Worcestershire, and like red hot, salt, pepper, just a mixture of stuff.
What that vinegar does is it breaks down the meat. It makes it more tender. If you were to try to cook mutton quickly, it's going to be really tough. It's going to be kind of gamey. So it really needs that slow smoke, that added flavor, really intense vinegar to help break down those proteins to produce a tender bite of meat.
But I think the secret is getting the dip to the meat. I mean, the smoke flavor and all that's going to happen with that mutton when it's on that open pit. You're going to get that because it's going to be absorbing all that hickory and oak smoke that comes off of it.
So there are really two different ways to do mutton. You can do sliced mutton or you can do chopped mutton. Those are the two different ways to do it. Sliced, as you can imagine, after they cook the meat, they just slice it. With chopped, they kind of grind it all together, add some spices. The chopped is a little more tender, a little more like a pulled pork to your mouth than the sliced mutton would be. Sliced mutton is more like, comes off with the texture of almost a beef as you cut into it, but it's going to be a lot more tender and a lot more tangier because of those Worcestershire and vinegar spices.
As to why it's remained popular there, a lot of that seems to have come about through tradition. There were a lot of Catholic churches in the area, and they would traditionally hold these huge community potlucks. And you see them set up in fields, and they have these enormous iron cauldrons set up to cook throughout the day and through the event. And so a lot of times for that, they'd use barbecue or make some kind of burgoo, and they'd use the meat that was readily available in the area, which was typically mutton.
For here, especially in Owensboro and Daviess County, it is huge. Every one of the Catholic churches, we actually do our picnics during the year, and it's a staple of our picnics, and that's what makes us unique as a barbecue festival.
the Chamber of Commerce, they wanted to create a one-stop shop event where you could try everyone's barbecue all in one location. And that's how the International Barbecue Festival started. The International Barbecue Festival is always the second weekend in May, so Mother's Day weekend. It's on a Friday and Saturday in downtown Owensboro. Essentially, our downtown becomes a smoke pit. But these are churches that have these giant pits that they literally throw trees in to get the fire going. They cook them overnight.
Got mutton here on the pit. Put it on here about around 2:30. Gonna cook at least about 6 to 8 hours.
And it's a big competition for the Governor's Cup.
All four of us, the cooking teams, are all around the same courthouse, so we compete, but we're friendly competitors. If somebody needs something, we grab something for each one of them. So it's kind of nice.
I think you will see mutton make a comeback. I think people are more open and willing to try new things. People are trying to seek out that authentic experience where they can try something that you can't get anywhere else. You know, cooking in Owensboro, it really is an experience. Not only do the restaurants take pride in cooking, but the residents do, the churches. And I think it's about the story. It's about the family that gets together. There's no better gift than food.